Tudo bem, pessoal? Esse vídeo vai mostrar para vocês exatamente a verdade do que está acontecendo lá no Oriente Médio, as pressões que estão sendo sofridas lá, tanto pelo Congresso quanto pelo governo americano, o que os maiores analistas do mundo falam com relação a isso e por que provavelmente na segunda-feira os Estados Unidos vai meter o pé e vai deixar o Netanyahu sozinho. Porque o que ele está fazendo está desestabilizando tanto o governo dos Estados Unidos quanto as relações americanas e, principalmente, está expondo exatamente tudo que ele é. E é colocado, inclusive, por alguns desses analistas como o grande clone do maior malfeitor que os israelitas, que os judeus, já tiveram na década de 40.
But it's certainly been their policy since Netanyahu took over. He is the most draconian leader Israel has had in its short history since 1948.
How do you see this?
He is the Führer. He is the Führer.
Quando aquele alemão fez coisas bem parecidas com eles, e ele está repetindo em cima de um povo que ele também considera sub-raça. Dá uma olhadinha que vocês vão gostar. Mas se inscrevam no canal, deixem seu like, não esqueçam de deixar seu comentário, passe para os amigos. Aqui você tem verdade. Uma verdade que normalmente você não vê por aí. Porque aí os caras ficam adorando a pílula para um lado, adorando para o outro. Aqui não. Aqui é a verdade. Tem muita coisa de legenda, nós traduzimos mais de 6 coisas diferentes, 6 pontos diferentes, de diversos jornalistas e analistas internacionais importantíssimos e altamente respeitados. Se você não quer acreditar na gente, pelo menos acredita neles. Com vocês, os melhores.
I think that we have become increasingly isolated over a long period of time. I would not attribute it exclusively to Netanyahu's dominance of the policymaking arena in Washington. We have to go back and look at the last 30 years and the trouble that we have caused in many cases on a regional basis in Europe as well as in the Middle East to understand why our supposed partners and allies are increasingly silent and walking away from us. And now, of course, with Europe in turmoil, thanks to the economic policies directed at Russia that failed miserably, you add that to the situation in the Middle East where any of the Muslim states that had previously worked with us are now completely unwilling to do so. You have almost a global disaster. Certainly everyone in Latin America, Africa, in the Far East, no one really is pleased with us or the way we do business. And we continue to insist that that's not true, but it is.
Well, can you put your finger on 1 or 2 or 3 causes of this? Is it our unbridled support for Israel and the perception that it is engaged in indiscriminate slaughter? Is it our, going back to George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, view of American exceptionalism? Is it the $2 trillion we spent killing people in Afghanistan and Iraq, supposedly to bring Western democracy there?
I think you're describing our foreign policy, which essentially amounts to playing risk with democracy. That everything we do is, at least in theory, designed to promote liberal democracy wherever it does not exist, to go to quote unquote ungoverned spaces and impose order and ultimately liberal democracy. Well, all of these have failed miserably. And ultimately over time, people say, well, why are you really where you are? Why are you in Iraq? Why are you in Syria? Why are you in Lebanon? Why are you in Libya? It doesn't make any difference. Why are you interested in what's happening in Taiwan? There are no armies prepping to invade Taiwan. There's no interest in Taiwan or China in a war with anybody. All of this revolves around an ideological construct that views the world through the lens of democracy, the way the Bolsheviks viewed the world through the lens of communism. And ultimately, like the Bolsheviks, we've taken a position that anything we do is morally justified. And that certainly is the position that Mr. Netanyahu has taken, and we have eagerly adopted it.
Let's bore down a little bit. Since you and I last spoke, the Security Council of the United Nations voted 13 in favor, 1 against. Since it was the U.S., it was effectively a veto, and 1 abstention on calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. The abstention, of course, was the Brits, who you know better than I will always do what we ask them to do. The U.S. explanation for vetoing this was, why give Hamas a chance to regroup? How does that play in the international arena?
If you look at the actions that have been taken, look at the words that have been spoken, and you are an Arab, a Turk, an Iranian who live somewhere in the Near East, North Africa, you conclude the following. All of us are effectively animals, subhuman. We all deserve the worst. And we are in a war today against Israel that is not anything like the wars that have been fought in the past. This is not 1973 or 67. This is not a short-term expedient to either expand the country or, for that matter, to simply have more defensible borders, which Israel has always wanted and every nation state does. This is now, in the minds of Arabs, Turks, and Iranians, a war for Jewish supremacy in the Middle East. Full stop. That's the war. If you are in our way, you die. There's no compromise, there is no negotiation, and there will be none. Anyone who does not succumb to our power, who does not ultimately submit to what we want, is the enemy and will be destroyed. Now, this is enabled by the United States. Let there be no doubt about it. Remember, most of us in the United States, I include myself in this category, are very sympathetic to the Israeli state. We're sympathetic for reasons that go back 50, 60, 70 years. But this is a fundamental change in the way the Israelis have done business in the past and the way they're going to do business from now on. And that's why this war can only escalate. This is not a war that's going to end in a couple of weeks or another month from now. This is going to escalate well into next year, and it's going to be a do or die proposition for everyone involved, especially Israel.
Here's the statement by the deputy U.S. ambassador to the UN when he cast his veto, and then we will follow it with the statement of three Arab leaders who were in D.C. At the time. All this is in English and quite compelling.
Although the United States strongly supports a durable peace in which both Israelis and Palestinians can live in peace and security, we do not support this resolution's call for an unsustainable ceasefire that will only plant the seeds for the next war.
We believe there is a moral obligation toward the international community to stop the killing of the Palestinian civilians. And it's the first time, at least in my lifetime, that I have seen that calling for a ceasefire became a controversial issue.
I'm not sure how deep is the understanding here of what's happening on the ground in Gaza. This war has broken every record. Largest number of journalists killed, largest number of hospitals destroyed, largest number of medics killed, largest number of UN employees killed.
Our message has been very clear. There needs to be an immediate ceasefire, there needs to be a cessation of hostilities, and we need to have immediate access for humanitarian aid. It is not acceptable.
Probably the opinions of 1 billion human beings who live in that part of the world.
Well, here are a couple of things for consideration. The first is that our actions speak much louder than our words. We talk about a just peace for the Palestinians, a secure and just peace for the Israelis. That's not possible. We can't create it. We can't impose it. We've been compelled to choose sides. We've chosen the Israeli side. But in doing so, we did not set any limits on what the Israelis could or could not do. We simply unconditionally said, by all means, we support you. And we've sent, 15,000 bombs, precision munitions, including 100 2,000-pounders that can be lobbed at will by the Israelis wherever they like. We didn't say, we're only giving you so much. We're not going to support these kinds of actions. It's really unconditional support. So for us to talk about a just peace for the Palestinians in the minds of Arabs, Turks, and Iranians is essentially to say, we'll give you a just peace. It's called the cemetery. We'll give you the peace of the grave, and that's about it. Now, that satisfies the current government of Israel, but it puts us in a very difficult position globally as well as regionally. Now, the second point I want to make, and I think this is very important, there's a concept or a word in Arabic called asadiyah. This is a word you don't hear much anymore, but it's a word that refers to social cohesion, group solidarity, or unity of action. It is a word that was used by Ibn Khaldun, probably the most famous historian of the Middle Ages, who happened to have been an Arab from Tunis. his work had a profound impact on the West. Everyone from Toynbee to Oswald Spengler all studied and read his works. You could actually call him the father of modern historianism, if there's such a thing. And in it, he says, those who have not seen the power of Islam do not appreciate it. Today, we have historically viewed, and today we view Islam as weak, a loose grouping of states that are more interested in killing each other than they are in doing any damage to anyone else. There have been a few exceptions, but that's essentially the analysis. Assadiyya, however, is emerging in the Arab world. It's emerging because of this war for Jewish supremacy in the region that we are supporting. And it is bringing states and peoples into coalition now that historically have not cooperated in any meaningful way for centuries. I think we've reached this dramatic strategic inflection point. That's another reason why this war is not going to end anytime soon. There may be a lull, there may be pauses, but ultimately this regional coalition that is emerging is going to strike back with a vengeance unlike anything we've ever seen.
What military benefit is there to the Israelis, military, Colonel, to the indiscriminate slaughter of civilians?
Well, historically, the Israelis, when they did attack areas where terrorists had operated from, talked about, quote unquote, mowing the grass. In other words, we've got to go into the West Bank, we've got to go into southern Lebanon, we've got to go into Gaza, and we have to exact a price for what has been done. Well, this last attempt to destabilize and destroy Israel on the 7th of October was so horrific and so shocking and surprising that the Israelis have frankly reacted with something more than just vengeance. If this were simply an object lesson, if this were an attempt to restore deterrence, or what they think is deterrence, which is you kill some of us, we kill a lot more of you, we've long since passed that point. When you start talking about flattening Gaza, and effectively that's what's going on, driving out the population without regard to how many people are actually killed or not killed, and we've reached that point now where large numbers of people are simply being killed because they happen to be in the way of the flattening process. That's something well beyond mowing the grass, well beyond restoring deterrence, well beyond a simple object lesson. This is the message. We are supreme in this region. Challenge us and we will destroy you. And oh, by the way, right behind us, we have the United States Armed Forces, and those armed forces will be brought to bear against you. And it's one of the reasons I think the next step, frankly, as they finish flattening Gaza, is to turn on Hezbollah with the goal of ultimately bringing us in. Because Hezbollah is a very large and powerful force. It's not going to be easily knocked out. In fact, I don't think it'll be knocked out at all. It can be damaged seriously, but the Israelis have already taken very heavy casualties. We don't know how many. I sent you a couple of things that came from Haaretz, Israeli newspaper, and from a journalist who talked about 3,700 killed, Israeli soldiers killed in Gaza. If that's true, that's a horrific number. Those are higher losses than Israel has ever taken in any of its wars. And given the small population of a little over 6 million Jews who serve in the IDF, that's not a minor issue in Israel. That means that your neighbor, certainly, or your neighbor who's one or two doors down from you, has lost someone. But I think the fact that they can call upon us to step in is enormously important. And I think that Mr. Netanyahu wants to exploit this while he can, because again, and we've talked about this before, most Americans are watching football. Most Americans are trying to figure out who Taylor Swift is dating next week. They're not paying attention to this, just as they ignored Ukraine. And the Ukrainian war was a war not quite, but close to something on the scale of the Korean War or World War II. And we effectively just continued to play and ignore what was happening and essentially told the government, well, you do whatever you think you have to do. And I don't think most people ever believed all the ridiculous assertions about Russian aggression and Russian threats and so forth, but they just don't care. Well, right now, the theater has shifted to the Middle East. The images that are coming out are much less easily controlled, much less easily suppressed. They're reaching us, they're reaching everyone in the world, and Americans are just beginning to say, gee, look at that. Isn't that awful? At some point, and I don't know when this is, there will be a growing majority opinion that this is enough. It has to stop and it can't go on. I don't know when that happens, But when it does, I think Mr. Netanyahu fears that he'll lose the kind of access to our military power and support that he wants to use to the maximum extent possible right now.
You spoke earlier about the aid that we give them, which is unconditional. There's no strings on it. I would argue, now I'm on the legal side, and there's no court of law here. It's a moral judgment as much as it is a legal one, that when we knowingly give them instruments with which they carry out obvious war crimes, we are as morally and legally complicit as they are. I asked Max Blumenthal not too long ago, what would Joe Biden have to do to stop this? Here was Max's response.
Well, the Biden administration could end the occupation of Palestine tomorrow. They could have a Palestinian state while we're doing this live stream. All they have to do is say no more spare parts for your F-16s, no more F-35s, and it's over. Because Israel its occupation depends entirely on its direct line to Washington. And Biden won't do that. And Tony Blinken won't do that because Tony Blinken comes from a long line of Israel lobbyists.
Well, I think Max is right about halting the aid and the delivery of the aid. That's true. That would bring everything to a halt. As far as the two-state solution, I think people are now delusional if they think there is any future for the two-state solution. I don't see it. The Israelis won't accept it. And now, unfortunately, given the horrific actions in Gaza, I don't think anyone in the Muslim world is going to go along with it. And here again, we got to go back and understand the governments sitting in Cairo, in Amman, in Jordan, even in Damascus, in Lebanon, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, doesn't matter. None of those governments want a war, Judge. They're all opposed to war, but their populations are enraged. We talk a lot about democracy, but we don't practice it, obviously.
Yeah.
And what you've got in the East is a wave, democratic wave, if you will, of support for all-out war against the Israeli state. And by definition, because of our complicity, as you point out, us. I'm an American. I'm concerned preeminently about the United States. I still think we have an interest in the survival of the Israeli state. And that's one of the reasons we always said we would not allow any force to develop that might overwhelm, destroy, or drive the Jews in Israel into the sea. But that force is building. It's real. And we Americans have trouble with this because they say, well, why hasn't it happened? What about next week? What about next month? No, it hasn't happened, but it is building. And that's why I mentioned this Asadiyah. This is not a hollow term. It's not meaningless. And I think it's coming back into vogue right now in a dramatic way in the Islamic world.
So over the weekend, the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, exercised emergency authority under the Arms Export Control Act. No need to get into the weeds on that, but basically it says that the president, through the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense, can spend money unauthorized if it is an emergency and directly vital to the national security of the United States. And before that money can be spent, the Secretary of State or Defense of the president has to certify to the emergency nature and the immediacy nature under oath, which Tony Blinken did. Question: of what conceivable American national security benefit is the need to send 2,000-pound bombs to Israel without asking Congress's permission, knowing what they're going to do with those bombs?
Well, you say we know what they're going to do with them. I would urge you to reconsider that, because the real basis for this legislation, if you want to call it that, this granting of essentially limitless power to the executive branch to effectively arm and equip and fight whomever they like, is really the overriding determination to wage war against Iran. If Israel attacks Hezbollah and tries to destroy it, they know that they will come into a conflict situation with Iran. Iran will not stand by and allow Hezbollah to be destroyed. They know it, and we know it, and you have people on the Hill that desperately want this war with Iran. They've convinced themselves that Iran is evil incarnate, that all the problems in the Middle East stem from Iran, even though Iran hasn't invaded anybody. Iran has no military power that it can actually project with any great success. It just has an enormous arsenal of missiles and rockets and now increasingly unmanned systems that it can use against an opponent. That's something else, and that's dangerous. But the Iranians have demonstrated remarkable restraint. So have the Russians. Everyone has restrained themselves vis-a-vis us. But if you get a war with Hezbollah and you promise to deliver whatever is needed, you're really taking a decisive step in the direction of widening this war to include Iran. And in some respects, I think Mr. Netanyahu is seriously considering the widening of this war. I think he wants to, quote unquote, settle accounts. It's back to the issue is what are we Israelis really fighting for? He'll tell you we're fighting for our lives. Well, there are many ways to save your life. Attacking your neighbors isn't necessarily one of them. There are many ways to pursue diplomacy. They'll tell you that's all a waste of time and it won't work. Therefore, the only thing we can do is kill everybody that doesn't like us. Well, that's a tall order in the region because Israel doesn't have any friends there. But now it has serious enemies. And the populations are going to shape the destiny of Israel in the future.
Is this an American national security interest or an American domestic policy reality? Domestic politics reality, excuse me.
I think it is a reality of domestic politics. The American people have been conditioned for decades to see Iran exclusively as some enemy that had to be destroyed. I mean, I could take you into Walmart or CVS and ask somebody, well, what do you think about those Iranians? Oh, they're bad. Yeah, they're terrible. I mean, it's worked. It goes back to our discussions about why are all of these people so quick to swallow the line about Russia being evil and corrupt and dangerous and invading everyone? Well, you fell back on the Cold War. There's still that underlying consciousness, and there's a willingness to accept what's being taught in academia, what comes across the airwaves on television. Americans used to be people that would sit there and say, wait a minute, what's this got to do with us? They don't do that anymore. They have been, quote unquote, brainwashed, conditioned intellectually, socially to say Iran is evil and bad, therefore get rid of it. Now, there are younger people who don't necessarily share that assumption. And I don't think Americans really understand what war means. A friend of mine who fought in Vietnam, he was a helicopter gun pilot. As a warrant officer, he's a great person. And worked for years in the intelligence committee, worked with me when I was at Supreme Headquarters of Allied Powers Europe. And he was telling me, he said, Americans have no idea what's going on. We had army groups in Europe between 44 and 45, from June of 44 until the war ended, that sustained 756,000 casualties. More casualties, more losses than we could replace. We've forgotten that war involves a lot of killing. The Israelis are experiencing that now, and they are not insensitive to it. But imagine it on a regional scale, an industrial scale. We lost 19,000 casualties a month from June of 44 until the Battle of the Bulge broke out, and then it went up to 100,000 a month. I'm just talking about American forces in Europe. We never bring these things up. That's war. And we have played with this war thing, and now we've watched what the Russians have done, who understand war. They have a grasp of it. Look what they have done. And they build a force for war. This is not some boutique, specialized Army or Marine Corps designed to go into third world countries where nobody has air defense, where nobody can defend themselves effectively, where they have very little organized military power. That's a force capable of waging scientific industrial war in the 21st century. We don't have that. And if we drag ourselves into this thing by provoking a war with Iran, this thing will spread because the Russians will not stand by and watch us destroy Iran. China has enormous interests in the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula. It imports most of its oil and gas from there. Russia has tried to make up for some of it when it could not reach it. But today, it's impossible to feed the Chinese industrial machine without the Persian Gulf, without the Middle East. They are not going to stand by and watch us annihilate Iran. And we've talked before about the Turks. The Turks are, that nation is ready to fight. Mr. Erdogan has talked himself into a real corner, in my judgment, because people there are enraged and ready to fight. This is a large gasoline storage site that simply needs the right match at the right time and the right location, and it will blow up.
Here's a clip from a former colleague of yours, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who shares your views and my views on nearly all these things, being pretty critical about Prime Minister Netanyahu. I wonder if you agree.
Since Netanyahu took over, indeed, probably since Ronald Reagan had to really bash the Israelis when they went into Lebanon in 1982. But it's certainly been their policy since Netanyahu took over. He is the most draconian leader Israel has had in its short history since 1948.
How do you see
He is the Führer. He is the Führer.
Well, fair.
Well, that may be true. And I don't think at this point it's terribly relevant because this situation has moved well beyond Mr. Netanyahu. The forces in play now will not be easily arrested. They will not be contained. The so-called genie is out of the bottle.
Even if Netanyahu were to go for domestic political reasons, your view is the genie stays out of the bottle.
Yes, I think we're in a position now that I tried to describe in the regional sense with all of the Islamic world. And I don't see an easy way through this at this point. If we were to stop supplying the Israelis, that might have an impact in the short term, but in the long term, their strategic position now requires support, or they will go out of existence. And even with our support, potentially in the next 12 months, given what I see emerging on the horizon, that may be very questionable.
And the pig-headed side wears the red, white, and blue of the United States of America. And I'm ashamed of my government. I'm ashamed of the stance taken by my government because it flies in the face of everything that I was raised to believe America stood for. But it's also just, it's fundamentally unsound policy. Look, Israel has set an impossible bar in the Gaza. They've said that they will destroy Hamas militarily and politically, eliminate them. That isn't going to happen. Israel will never achieve this. And so by supporting Israel, we're supporting a policy that can't be implemented, which means we are setting ourselves up for failure. We should be working with Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan on how to get Hamas to the table. How can we get Hamas to moderate its position so that it can become a negotiating partner? Because Hamas has won this war. As we're speaking, Hamas has fought the IDF to a standstill in most areas in Gaza. The Israelis are forced to retreat from certain areas, and Israel is now looking at shifting their tactics because what they're doing is unsustainable. Israel has lost. You won't know that by looking at mainstream TV, et cetera. But the bottom line is they're not winning this fight. And Hezbollah's there's a real danger of Hezbollah joining this fight from the north. And if they do that, Israel's going to lose northern Israel. They'll lose the Galilee. Hezbollah will occupy this. And now we're in the situation where Israel will feel an existential threat, and they may use nuclear weapons. And where are we in all this? Trapped in a trap of our own construct.
How bad have the IDF casualties been, which the Netanyahu government is trying to shield? Do you have any word on that?
Well, remember, there's certain units that are classified units, and so they may hide their casualties more effectively than others. Generally speaking, because of Jewish law, a body has to be buried a certain period of time after it dies, I think within 24 hours. And so the Israelis will be open about the vast majority of their dead. What they're not talking about are the wounded. There's a horrific number of severely wounded Israeli soldiers, by some numbers up to 5,000 and growing. And of these, over 2,000 are permanently disabled. So while the number of dead Israelis isn't, it's very high for Israeli standards. Right now, over 100 of their soldiers have died in Gaza. But the number of wounded and crippled and permanently disabled soldiers is in the thousands. This is an unsustainable number for Israel.
How unsustainable are stunts pulled by the IDF, like kidnapping Gazan young men, stripping them down to their underwear, parading them through the streets and pretending that they're captured Hamas when we know that Hamas doesn't surrender?
Look, a lot of what the IDF is doing is playing to a domestic audience. They were humiliated on October 7th. They're facing humiliation today. So they're pulling off these stupid PR stunts to generate literal clicks on Israeli social media. This is the definition of stupidity and lunacy. What they did with those Palestinian men was a war crime, a literal war crime. It's unforgivable. But again, America, instead of calling them out and saying, what the heck are you up to? We're silent. We're saying no ceasefire. Continues. They're blowing up schools. They're blowing up mosques. They're going into the homes of Palestinians, into the women's bedrooms and pulling out their lingerie and mocking them. They're going into schools and putting down the most coarse graffiti. They're animals, pure animals. This is the kind of stuff that we would expect Nazi Germans to do. And it's being done by the IDF, a nation born out of the memory of the Holocaust. It's shameful. And what's even more shameful is that America is being silent in the face of this flagrant disregard for norms, values that we espouse.
Here's Admiral Kirby on aid to Gaza, defending the United States because of no country in the world, according to Admiral Kirby, has done more to aid Gaza. I think you're going to change the verb in there after you listen to him.
Look, we certainly share the concerns that so many of others have concerned, including the Secretary General, about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Name me one more nation, any other nation, that's doing as much as the United States to alleviate the pain and suffering of the people of Gaza. You can't. You just can't. The United States, through President Biden, is leading the effort to get trucks, food, water, medicine, and fuel into the people of Gaza. Wait. Name another nation. Name another nation that's doing as more than the United States to get hostages out or to get people, foreign nationals, out of Gaza. You can't do it. And name another nation that is doing more to urge the Israeli counterparts, our Israeli counterparts, to be as cautious and deliberate as they can be in the prosecution of their military operations. You can't.
I mean, this is delusional. Name another nation that has facilitated more death in Gaza than the United States. You can't.
Look, John Kirby, let me give you an answer. More for aid? This is easy, John. Egypt, Turkey, Jordan, right there. Bam! 3 nations have done far more than the United States to provide humanitarian support. Release of hostages? You haven't done a damn thing. It's Qatar that's done it. It's Egypt that's done it. It's Turkey that's doing it behind the scenes, not the United States of America. And to urge caution, you sent a 3-star general over to greenlight the Israeli battle plan. And he came back and the Israelis went in. You continue to provide ammunition. They're bombing the hell out of these people with the bombs we provided. They're running short of bombs, so we send them more bombs. So please don't tell me that you're doing everything possible. John Kirby, you're a war criminal. You are literally a lying sack of manure. I mean, God, I know we're on TV and I'm supposed to be a peaceful man, but John, you're in dark alley someday, and it ain't going to turn out well for you. As I explained to you in Morse code, everything you say is a lie, and you know it's a lie. I mean,
your anger is justified. It's normal. It's human. This is our government for which you worked in dangerous situations for many years. And this is what it's turned into. Wasn't the purpose of World War II to prevent genocide, to stop genocide? And now we're facilitating it. Chris, run the other Kirby on. They try and get them to answer about the fake captives.
Very quickly, there's disturbing images from Gaza, in northern Gaza, of people being arrested by the Israeli army, blindfolded, stripped naked. Some of them are journalists that we identified, and some are civilians. Israel is saying they're Hamas fighters, regardless who they are. Isn't that Israel still acting within the international law in the treatment of prisoners?
As I said, I'm not going to respond to every event on the ground and every occurrence. I haven't seen those images. It would be imprudent for me to comment on that. We don't, just as a general statement. We don't support any targeting of journalists one way or another, anywhere in the world. They have a right and a responsibility to be there reporting on this. We believe that they should be allowed to do their jobs, and we certainly don't, would never condone any inhumane or violation of law treatment of any innocent civilian. But I can't speak to those specific reports.
We know damn well he has seen those images.
Everybody saw those images. He's a liar. And John, please get off your high horse. The United States bombed Al Jazeera's offices in Baghdad in the 2003 war. You may not remember it, John. I do. We have targeted journalists as long as the journalists have been around who say things that we don't approve of. Now, we don't admit to it, but we do it. I mean, so to sit there and blatantly lie about the murder of journalists that's taking place, John, you know that the Israelis are targeting the pro-Palestinian Arab journalists in Gaza because Israel is losing the international public relations campaign. And one of the reasons why they're losing this campaign is that these journalists are doing yeoman's work in getting the truth out of Gaza to the world to see. So what does Israel do? Slaughter the journalists, kill them to try and shut them up. And you know they're doing it, John. You know they're doing it. And you're a liar. You saw the pictures. You know about the pictures. You're the damn press spokesperson. I can guarantee you the moment those pictures appeared on TV, they appeared across your desk with a big thing. What do we say about it? And you know what your solution was, John? To lie, because you're a liar.
Over the weekend, the Secretary of State of the United States signed a statement under oath invoking emergency powers in behalf of the president, bypassing the Congress to send $100 million worth of shells and ammunition and small arms rounds to Israel. In order to do that, under the statute, he had to swear, again under oath, that this was a true emergency, a threat to the national security of the United States. Now, Scott, how can they do this to us with a straight face? How can they even make an argument that bypassing Congress to send $100 million in explosive materials enhances the national security of the United States?
They can't. They can't. But the problem is Congress is bought and paid for by Israel. Israel is going to spend $100 million in the upcoming election. When I say Israel, I mean AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee that claims to be purely an American institution. But, in the past, their employees have been caught spying on behalf of Israel. We know there's the money. Show me the money. There it is. Israel owns the American Congress. This is why the American Congress will not hold the president accountable for violating the rule of law, for violating the Constitution, for violating the laws of the land in supporting Israel. This is ridiculous. Look, Israel getting beat is not by Hamas in Gaza is not a national security threat to the United States of America. It may be a problem for Israel, but Israel ain't America. That's the one thing people have to start understanding. There is no American Israel joined at the hip. They don't like us. Friends don't buy the loyalty of friends. Okay, that's what's happening here. They're buying elections to get Congress to do their bidding. Man, if Israel was everything they claim to be, you wouldn't have to buy Congress. We would just naturally inclined to support our Israeli friends. But no, they have to be bought. Why? Because Israel has attacked the USS Liberty, slaughtering American sailors in 1967. Israel threatened American Marines in 1982. Israel has spied upon the United States, Jonathan Pollard. Israel has put listening devices near the White House to spy on the cell phone communications of Barack Obama and Donald Trump, and they're probably doing it against Joe Biden today. Israel is not our friend. Israel is using the United States for its own purposes, and its own purposes run counter to everything we stand for as a nation. Equality, individual freedoms. No, Israel's all about Jewish people, Jewish Israelis, the Zionists. They're not about Palestinians. They're not about, Egyptians, Syrians. They're not about Americans. Unless you have a dual citizenship, unless you have dual passport, they don't care about you. They only care about themselves. This is okay. Nations are supposed to look out for their own interests. But America, please wake up. Israel is not our friend. In fact, in many ways, Israel is our enemy. And in many ways, they're our worst enemy because we have been lulled into believing they're our friends and they're getting away with literal murder.
While we speak, the United Nations Security Council just voted on a resolution demanding an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. 153 in favor, 10 against, 23 abstained. I don't have the list of the against or the abstained, but it does tell you about the consensus in the international community. Of what value to the United States, other than domestic American politics, is the relationship between the U.S. and Israel?
There was a time in the Cold War when one could articulate that sound relations with Israel was beneficial because the Soviet Union had made inroads in large numbers of Arab nations, Egypt, Iraq, etc. And having Israel as a bulwark against that as sort of an American aircraft carrier, so to speak, in the Mediterranean was of value. But as the Cold War ended, that geopolitical posturing ceased to exist. And that's about the time that Israel made a decision that they needed to change their approach to the United States. Rather than trying to sell themselves as an asset that would naturally attract American support, Israel started selling themselves as an extension of America, buying our loyalty by buying our Congress. Israel provides nothing to the United States. It costs us money, and right now it's destroying our reputation even worse than we already have around the world. We are more isolated today than we have been at any time in modern history.
Are you of the view that domestic political forces will expel President Netanyahu from office, or are you of the view that the IDF will continue its monstrosities in Gaza and other forces like Hezbollah will enter the fray?
Well, first of all, I think that Israel's scared to death of Hezbollah entering the fray because they know that they can't beat Hezbollah. And they definitely can't beat Hezbollah without American assistance. And if Israel continues to push for a conflict that we don't want to fight, the level of American assistance may be negligible at best. I think that Netanyahu's days on this earth are limited. He has less than 4% approval rating in Israel. He's lost the trust of the Israeli people, and right now he's become an impediment to the political fortunes of Joe Biden. Remember, Joe Biden is an American president, but he's also an American politician who's seeking re-election come November of 2024. And right now, Israel is sinking his ship. I mean, Ukraine has punched a big hole in his ship, but Israel's sinking his ship. And so I think you're going to see Joe Biden go into damage control mode. And the first thing that's going to happen is that Benjamin Netanyahu and his right-wing government are going to be jettisoned. And then the next question is, who's going to take over and what are we going to have to do with them to bring an end to this conflict? Because again, I'll just remind everybody, Hamas can't be beat. They've already won. And it's just a question of how many more innocent Palestinians are going to die before Israel, the United States, recognize the inevitability of this Hamas victory.
Before we go, I want to switch gears to Ukraine. Here's two clips. Here's Joe Biden in July of this year, just 5 months ago. And then again, Joe Biden last week saying essentially the opposite.
The issue of whether or not this is going to keep Putin from continuing to fight. The answer is Putin's already lost the war. Putin has a real problem. How does he move from here? What does he do? And so the idea that there's going to be what vehicle is used, he could end the war tomorrow. He could just say, I'm out. But what agreement is ultimately reached depends upon Putin. You know, extreme Republicans are playing chicken with our national security, holding Ukraine's funding hostage to their extreme partisan border policies. If Putin takes Ukraine, he won't stop there. It's important to see the long run here. He's going to keep going. He's made that pretty clear. If Putin attacks a NATO ally, then we'll have something that we don't seek and that we don't have today. American troops fighting Russian troops. American troops fighting Russian troops if he moves into other parts of NATO.
Is it, Joe? Has Putin lost, or is he about to, quote, take Ukraine? But this is really absurd from the mouth of an American president, Scott.
Well, it just shows that when he speaks, he speaks with a superficiality that is defined more by domestic American politics than reality on the ground. You and I know when you played that clip originally, we critiqued it and just said, how can he say that Putin's losing? Putin was winning. Well, now Putin's won. I mean, there's still fighting left to be done, but the Ukrainians are out of money at the end of this month. Congress has made it clear they ain't getting any more money. Ukraine's going to start eating itself. It's like a starving body. It's going to start feeding upon itself. The Ukrainian military has already made a decision that they're going to have to withdraw to more defensible positions, but they don't have anything left to defend. Russia, on the other hand, has hundreds of thousands of troops yet to be committed to this battle. This war is over. It's a humiliating defeat. But the good news is that Russia has no intention whatsoever of moving into Poland or the Baltics, etc. This is totally a false construct made by, there's the president of Russia putting the hat on.
It's in the West Bank, and the cap of one of the honor guards falls off, and the president himself picks it up and puts it on the fellow's head.
Yeah, I feel sorry for that guy later on in the barracks because he's going to be harassed for that, as any soldier would be for losing control of their cover. But the fact is, Russia is not going to invade Poland. So the president put forward, the good news is all this fear about Americans fighting Russians is predicated on Russia going into NATO, Article 5 being triggered. That just isn't going to happen. And so once again, this is the president lying to the American people about issues of national security and national fiscal policy. $60 billion he wants. I'm not a big fan of Mike Johnson, but he said something today when he spoke about it. He said, before we give Ukraine $60 billion, we need to, A, have accountability. We need, an inspector general in place. And B, we need a plan. You need to tell us, okay, we give you $60 billion. What are you going to do with it? How are you going to win? He said, Ukraine doesn't have a plan. The Biden administration doesn't have a plan, and they don't. It's simply pouring, good money after bad. And thank goodness we have somebody in the U.S. Congress who's finally saying, time out, this isn't going to happen.
Eu sei que ficou um pouco longo, mas eu espero que vocês tenham entendido, gostado e conseguido buscar muita coisa para formar a sua verdadeira opinião do que está acontecendo lá, tá? Agora eu queria trazer algumas notícias rápidas e no próximo vídeo eu vou botar rapidinho aqui um monte de imagens do que eu venho dizendo. Israel está tomando um pau feio. um pau muito feio toda vez que tenta adentrar na faixa de Gaza. Jogar bomba, matar mulher, criança, nisso eles estão dando show. Agora, quando eles tentam entrar no terreno, é só bordoada. E eu trago para vocês aqui. Por isso que a gente diz que eles já têm, os hospitais lá já têm mais de 5 mil feridos, e por isso nós estamos projetando um número de mortos acima de 2 mil. E é absurdo o que a gente vê de blindados sendo destruído e dos soldados israelenses indo para o saco. E agora, o Hamás está fazendo uma coisa que mexe muito com o povo israelense. Ele está dando nome aos bois. Ele está pegando o cara que mataram, por exemplo, um tenente-coronel que mataram agora, ele está botando o nome, está botando a cara, está botando a arma. Pegamos esse. São pessoas que estão morrendo para impedir a nossa independência. Simplesmente por atos insanos desse governo criminoso do Ben-Gvir, do Netanyahu e da turminha dele, que fatalmente vão sofrer mais tarde duras penas num tribunal internacional. Isso se os organismos internacionais ainda tiverem algum respeito, alguma vergonha na cara. Porque o que está acontecendo não pode ficar impune. E se você apoia, amigo, desculpe. Ou você está mal informado, tá? Ou seu amigo que apoia está mal informado, ou simplesmente tem algum desvio. Porque isso não dá para aturar. 17 a 20 mil palestinos mortos como se fossem terroristas, sendo que eles mesmos dizem que o Hamás tem 4 mil. Onde é que está acontecendo? Está brotando gente? É isso? Está brotando gente? Meio estranho, né? Muito esquisito. Fora que nesse meio, mais 60% são de crianças e mulheres. Tá? A coisa tá feia. Se inscreve, deixa seu like. Aqui você tem verdade. Deixa seu comentário, passa para os seus amigos a verdade que está aqui. Eu sei que os vídeos são longos, mas a verdade tem que ser bem explicada.
חבר'ה, גדוד 13 גיבורים, אבל זאת רק ההתחלה. זאת רק ההתחלה. יש לנו עוד לילות של הגנה, ויש לנו עוד מבצע לתמרן. אני רק אסיים במה שהתחלתי.
חטיבת גולני תמשיך להילחם עד הניצחון, ועם ישראל חי. עם ישראל כאן גדוד 13, אנו ממשיכים מכאן ליעדים הבאים. עבודה רבה עוד לפנינו, ויודעים אנחנו שאתם מאחורינו.
תראו מה זה, הנבואה שהגשימה את עצמה. תור יום הכיפורים, אחד לאחד. עוד 10 שנים תהיה מג"ד גיבור לגדוד 13 עם לוחמים גיבורים. חלקכם כבר תהיו הורים, חלקכם כבר לא יודע איפה תהיו. והוא יקפיץ את הגדוד ביום כיפור ויספר עליכם ויראה תמונות של ההרוגים שלנו. אז כנראה שאתם לא כאלה מפונקים, וכנראה שאתם לא פחות גיבורים, וכנראה שאתם לא דור האייפון. אז כל הכבוד לכולם, גאה אחד במי שעומד פה, אבל זאת רק ההתחלה.
13. הבוקר כבשנו את רחבת המסדרים של מצב קטיבה שנמצאת בלב העיר עזה, וכעת אנו עושים בטקס קרבי סמלי לקראת המשך הלחימה. רחבה זו כעת בידי גדוד 13 של גולני. דגלי ישראל וגולני מתנוססים בגאווה רבה מעל הרקמים שלנו. המלחמה עוד ארוכה ויש עוד הרבה יעדים להשיג, אבל כשהיא תסתיים נגיע אליכם במהרה הביתה. יש לנו הרבה לספר לכם על גבורת ילדיכם. לסיום אומר, גדוד 13 לא נשבר לעולם, וגדוד 13 לעולם לא יישבר.
לוחמי גולני הגיעו לסג'איה כדי לסגור מעגל. הפעם הם לא יעזבו אותה עד החיסול המוחלט של גדוד סג'איה וכל תשתיות הטרור שנמצאות שם.
Daqui a pouco eu trago para vocês vídeos rápidos, tá? Mostrando que na realidade o volume vai ser grande, mas vocês vão ver o que está acontecendo de verdade com um tal exército maravilhoso e as armas maravilhosas e milagrosas da Pixar, que tanto Israel quanto a OTAN usa. Vocês vão ver o que está acontecendo lá em campo, como é que explode igual bolo de farinha, tá? Virou churrasqueira de israelense. Um grande abraço, próximo Natal e um ótimo Ano Novo.